Today we begin the third part of this course. In the second part of the course, we discussed the agricultural revolution and the kind of societies that emerged as a result of the agricultural revolution. We emphasized that unlike in the case of chimpanzee societies or wolf societies, which are all pretty similar to one another, sapient societies are very, very different the one from the other. Even when people share the same objective reality of rivers and trees and clouds, and they live in the same geographical zone under the same climate, still, different human societies often have different imagined orders and different social hierarchies. What we will try to do in the third part of the course is to examine how all these different human societies that emerged after the agricultural revolution interacted one with the other, and what exactly happened when people who believed in one kind of imagined order encountered people who believed in very different things. The interaction between different societies took all kinds of forms. There was, of course, war, there was trade, sometimes there was immigration from one society to the other, sometimes there were religious missionaries coming from one place to another place, and so forth and so on. And the number of such different interactions is colossal. Now, don't worry, we are not going to go in this course over all the various wars and trade expeditions and missionary efforts and immigration movements in history. We don't have the time to do so. What we will try to do in the third part of this course is to focus on one question which is particularly important. And the question is whether all the different interactions between human societies have some kind of overall pattern, overall direction, whether all these wars and immigrations and trade were leading humankind towards a particular destination, or whether it was just a collection of random forces pushing humankind sometime in this direction and sometime in another direction, and history as a whole does not have a destination. In other words, what will stand in the focus of the third part of the course is the question whether human history has a clear direction or not. And the answer, I'll give it right at the beginning, the answer is very simply yes. There is a destination, a direction to history. All the thousands of wars and revolutions and trade expeditions and immigration movements in history have a clear general direction, and this direction is global unity, global unification of the world and of humankind. And when you look at history over thousands of years, you see that as time goes on, small, simple cultures gradually combine to form bigger and more complex civilizations, so that over time, the world, planet Earth, contains fewer and fewer cultures, but each of these few cultures is becoming bigger and more complex. Now, this, of course, is a very crude generalization. It's true only at the highest level, at the macro level of history. And perceiving the direction and the events of history really depends on your vantage point, from which perspective you are looking at history. As long as you observe history from the height of, say, a rain cloud, and you see no more than a few centuries, it's hard to say whether history moves in the direction of unity or whether actually history moves in the opposite direction of diversity. Because from the vantage point of a rain cloud, it seems that for every group of cultures that combine to form a megaculture, a bigger culture, there is also some civilization, some big culture that breaks up into many, many small pieces. For example, the Mongol Empire expanded in the 13th century to dominate huge parts of Asia and even Europe, but after some time it shattered into fragments. Christianity, the Christian religion, converted and thus united hundreds of millions of people over time. But Christianity gradually splintered into innumerable different sects, so it's not necessarily leading to unity. The same thing with human language. Languages, let's take for example the Latin language, the language of the Roman Empire. This language spread over much of Western and Central Europe, and more people began to speak the same language, Latin. But then over time, Latin itself split into different dialects that eventually became different languages: French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and so forth. So from the vantage point of a rain cloud, it's not very clear if history is moving towards unity or towards diversity. However, as we climb over these clouds and begin to observe history from a much higher vantage point, from the vantage point, say, of a spy satellite, which can scan millennia and not just century, then it becomes very, very clear that history is moving relentlessly towards unity. Yes, there are things like the splintering of Christianity into different sects and the collapse of the Mongol Empire, but these are only speed bumps on the highway of history, which is leading humankind inexorably towards global unity, towards unification of the whole world. The best way to appreciate this, the general direction of history, is to simply count the number of separate human worlds that coexisted at any particular moment on planet Earth. Today, we are used to thinking about the whole planet, the whole of planet Earth, as a single interconnected unit. But for most of history, this was not the case. For most of history, Earth was in fact a kind of galaxy of many separated and isolated human worlds. If you went back, say, 2,000 years, you would have found that there are no connections, no economic, political, military connections between humans in America, humans in Europe, and humans in Australia. As far as the Aboriginal Australians were concerned, the Roman Empire, for example, and Christianity might have been happening on Mars or on Venus, on a different planet. So this is why it's more accurate to view planet Earth 2,000 years ago as being composed of a galaxy of separate human worlds, not of a single world. Now, how many different human worlds coexisted on Earth at any particular moment? Well, this changed as history progressed, and the number of separate worlds got smaller and smaller. Around 10,000 BC, when the agricultural revolution began, our planet contained many thousands of different human worlds which had almost no connection between them. By about 2000 BC, the number of different human worlds dwindled, and there are now just hundreds of them, or at most, say, a few thousands. By 1492, when Columbus was setting sail from Europe to America, the number of separate human worlds on planet Earth was even smaller. It declined much more drastically. At that time, 1492, Earth still contained a significant number of all kinds of small, isolated human worlds in remote jungles and islands which had no connection with the outside world. But at that point in history, close to 90% of humans already lived in a single mega world, the world of Afro-Asia. Most of Asia, most of Europe, and most of Africa, even before Columbus set sail, were already connected to each other by significant political and economic and religious and cultural ties. For example, the year before Columbus set sail, in 1491, if you were a Muslim pilgrim that made the Hajj, the visit, the pilgrimage to Mecca, to the center of the Islamic world, you could have met in Mecca pilgrims coming from all over Afro-Asia. You could have met the pilgrims coming, say, from the Iberian Peninsula, from North Africa, from Central Africa, from India, from Central Asia, from China, even from Indonesia. So all these different parts of Afro-Asia, they already had significant religious links and also significant economic and even political links between them in 1491. At that time, still 10% of the humanity was disconnected from this central world of Afro-Asia, but even these 10% of humanity was not broken up into thousands of different tiny separate worlds. They were concentrated instead in just 4 worlds, each of which was of considerable size and complexity. We had in 1491 the Mesoamerican world, which encompassed most of Central America and parts of North America. There was the Andean world, which contained most of Western South America. Most of Western South America was already connected to each other. People in what is today Ecuador and Chile and Bolivia and Peru, they had very close ties economically and culturally and so forth. A third world, independent world, was the Australian world, the world of the continent of Australia. And the fourth world was the oceanic world of the Pacific region, which included most of the islands of the southwestern Pacific Ocean from Hawaii to New Zealand. They all had cultural and political and economic connections between them. So in 1491, you have one big mega world, the world of Afro-Asia, with 90% of humanity belonging to that world, and 4 medium-sized worlds in North and Central America, South America, Australia, and the Pacific Ocean, and many other worlds, but very small ones, in all kinds of remote islands and jungles, which were not connected or very little connections to other people. What happened over the subsequent centuries was that people who came from the giant world of Afro-Asia spread over all the rest of the globe, conquering and swallowing up all the different independent worlds that existed previously in America and Australia and the Pacific Ocean and so forth, and they created the single global world in which we today, in the early 21st century, live. Today, almost all humans in the world live as part of the same system. They all share the same basic global culture, global outlook on the universe and on the world. People, no matter where they live, in China or Mexico, in Israel or in Iran, they are influenced by each other's actions. They are no longer living in separate worlds. A political conflict in the Middle East could cause oil prices to rise in China or Australia, and it may cause unemployment in Mexico or in Japan. People in all these places, China, Mexico, Israel, and Iran, are also increasingly sharing the same basic understanding of politics, of economics, and of the natural world. Take politics, for example. Even though people still have different political views and agendas, still the entire world today shares the same basic political model, the model of the sovereign nation states. All people in the world live in one or the other of the 200 nation states that cover the world. Most people in the world also believe today that political power should come from the people. And most countries have parliaments, have political parties, and have elections, even if they are not always completely free elections. But the same basic political ideas are today, you can today find them everywhere in the world. The same is true in the field of economics. Almost everywhere you go today around the world, you will find the same economic structures and ideas, the structures and ideas of the capitalist system, which we'll discuss at depth in a later lesson. Whether you go to America or Australia or Asia or Africa, you will find there stock exchanges, you will find there banks, you will find there limited liability company. And everywhere you go, if you reach in your pocket and you take out a dollar bill, you can buy something, you can buy bread. Whether it's in Europe, in Asia, or in America, the dollar bill, everybody wants it, all over the world. And this is something quite new. Also, we can observe the same phenomenon as far as the understanding of the natural world and of the human body is concerned. For most of history, people who lived in different parts of the world, they had a very different understanding and perspective on the natural world and on issues such as biology and medicine and so forth. But today, a hospital in Tehran and a hospital in Tel Aviv and in Buenos Aires and in New York, they look basically the same. They're using the same theories and the same medicines and the same treatments. If, for instance, you have a heart attack and you're taken in Tehran, or you have a heart attack in Tel Aviv and you are rushed to the hospital, so the doctors will diagnose you according to exactly the same medical theories. They will examine you using the same techniques and the same tools, and they will give you the same treatments and medicines, which very often are bought on the international market from the same drug-producing companies. We still talk an awful lot about authentic cultures, but the truth is that if by authentic we mean something that developed independently and that consists only of ancient local traditions, free of external global influences, then there are no more any authentic cultures left on planet Earth. Because over the last few centuries, all cultures, without exception, were changed almost beyond recognition by a flood of global influences and inventions. One of the most interesting examples in this respect is ethnic cuisine or ethnic food. Think, for example, about Italian food, Italian cuisine. The queen of the Italian cuisine is the tomato. What's more Italian than to eat spaghetti in tomato sauce? But in fact, the tomato is not native to Italy. The tomato originated in Central America, around Mexico. And the tomato arrived in Italy only about 300 or 400 years ago. If you go back to the time of Columbus, he came from Genoa and he never ate spaghetti in tomato sauce in his life. Dante Alighieri in the Middle Ages and Julius Caesar in ancient Rome, they never ate spaghetti in tomato sauce for the simple reason that there were no tomatoes in Italy before Columbus. Similarly, if you go to Switzerland in the Middle Ages, you can look all over Switzerland. You won't find even a single chocolate bar because there was no chocolate in Switzerland in the Middle Ages. Chocolate is made of cocoa, and cocoa, just like tomatoes, originated in Central America, and cocoa arrived in Europe only after the expeditions of the Spanish to Central and South America, sometimes in the 16th century. So there was no chocolate in Switzerland before Columbus. We also, other ethnic cuisine, for example, like in Poland or Ireland, they are based on potatoes. What's more Polish or what's more Irish than to eat potatoes? But there were no potatoes in Poland and Ireland in the Middle Ages because potatoes, again, they originated in America, in South America this time, and they did not exist at all in Europe before the Europeans arrived to America. Not only as a food of European people changed in the last 500 years, also the food of people in Asia and in America itself. Take Indian cuisine, Indian food as an example. If you go to an Indian restaurant, what's more Indian than chili peppers? Almost every conceivable Indian dish is spiced very, very generously with a lot of chili pepper. And it's hard to conceive today of life in India without the chili pepper to spice things up. But the truth is that the chili pepper, just like the tomato and like the potato, it's originated in America. There were no chili peppers anywhere in Asia or in India before Columbus. So Buddha, for example, he never ate chili. And nobody in India ate chili before the Europeans brought this plant from America. The food in America too, of course, changed. There was transition in the other direction as well. If you went to Argentina in 1491, you could look all over Argentina. You would not be able to obtain any steak except llama steak from this creature llama, because there was no cattle in Argentina before 1492. Cattle arrived to America with the Europeans. We see then that our conceptions of authentic ethnic cuisines actually reflect the development of the global world of the last few centuries, and it's not some primordial tradition, local traditions. And what is true of ethnic cuisine is true of many, many other facets of traditional or so-called traditional culture. If you look carefully at most of the facets of ethnic cultures around the world, you will find that many of them are in fact the modern developments and the result of global connections. What exactly drove forward this process of unification and globalization that brought tomatoes to Italy and chili to India and cattle to Argentina and have completely changed the face of the world? We often associate this process of unification with events only of the last few centuries, from Columbus onwards. In particular, we often associate the unification of the world with European imperialism and with the rise of the capitalist economy. And it is certainly true that the final stage of unification of humankind happened only in the modern era and was due to the twin forces of imperialism and capitalism, which we will discuss in the fourth part of this course. However, what is important to emphasize at this stage is that the globalization of the modern era was only the final step, only the climax of much older processes that began working thousands of years previously. Because as we saw, already in 1492, when Columbus set sail, the European conquerors of the world, they don't need to unify the world out of thousands of different separate islands and tiny cultures. Already when Columbus is born, most of humankind has been unified into the single giant world of Afro-Asia. And this is a process that began not in the 15th century, but thousands of years previously. The vision of a united world, of the whole of humankind being part of a single system, this vision may have been fulfilled only in the last century or two, but it's not a modern vision. It goes back at least to the first millennium BC. It was more than 2,000 years ago that the revolutionary idea of creating a universal order of all humans together first took root in the minds of sapiens in different parts of the world. This vision of a united world and a united humanity, which is today very familiar to us, is actually very, very strange, especially when you think about it from a biological and evolutionary perspective. Homo sapiens evolved to think of people as being divided into us versus them. Us is the group of people immediately around me and you, whoever you are, and them is everybody else in the world. And in fact, this is not unique to Homo sapiens. No social animal, as far as we know, thinks about the interests or the identity of the entire species to which it belongs. No chimpanzee, for example, cares about the interests of the entire chimpanzee species. No ant will do anything for the sake of the global ant community. Ants are willing to give their lives for their ant nest, but not for the global ant community. Similarly, despite what you see in Hollywood films, no lion was ever the king of all the lions. Male lions often fantasize about becoming the alpha male of their particular pride of lions, but they don't have a conception of uniting all the lions in the world under their rule. Similarly, if you go and visit all the beehives in the world, in no beehive will you find the slogan, "Worker bees of the world unite." Bees care a lot about their hive, but not about the other bees in the world. Beginning with the cognitive revolution, Homo sapiens started to become more and more exceptional in this respect, because people began to cooperate on a more regular basis with complete strangers whom they never met, but whom they imagined as being their brothers and friends. Nevertheless, this growing brotherhood between people was not universal. For tens of thousands of years after the cognitive revolution, people still continued to divide humanity into us versus them. There was us, and then somewhere in the next valley or beyond the mountain ranges, there were other people, strangers, who could still be called them. They did not belong to our community. For example, when the first pharaoh of Egypt, Menes, united the entire lower Nile Valley around 3000 BC into a single kingdom, Egypt, it was clear to the Egyptian that Egypt does not contain all the humans in the world. Egypt had borders, and beyond the borders there were other humans which were considered barbarians. And all the different imagined orders that people created in the centuries after the unification of Egypt still tended to ignore a large part of humankind. It was always just tribal religions and tribal identities, even if very, very large tribes, but there was always somebody outside the pale. There were always barbarians or people who do not belong with us. This changed in the first millennium BC. This is when the vision of the unification of the whole of humankind began to grow. In the first millennium BC appeared three potentially universal orders, and people who believed in these orders for the first time started to imagine the whole world and the whole human race as a single unit, which at least potentially may be governed by a single set of laws. According to this new universal vision, everybody in the world was us, at least potentially, and there were no longer any them, people who don't belong in our group. The first of these universal orders, the first universal order to appear in the world, was an economic order. It was the monetary order, which was based on the belief in money. The second universal order to appear was political. It was the imperial order, the vision of a single empire governing the whole world. And the third universal order that people began to believe in was a religious order, the order of universal religions, such as Buddhism and Christianity and Islam, that potentially aimed to include all of humankind as their members, as their believers. So merchants and conquerors and prophets were the first people in history who managed to transcend the binary evolutionary division between us and them, and to foresee the potential unity of the whole of humankind. In the third part of this course, what we will do is to discuss how money, empires, and universal religions spread around the world, and how they laid the foundations of the united global world of today. We will begin this story of human unification by focusing on the history of money and on the creation and spread of the monetary order. I chose to begin with money because the amazing thing about money is that it succeeded in doing something that no king, no conqueror, no god managed to do. And this is that even people who don't believe in the same God, and even people who don't believe in the same king, are often willing to use the same money. Even people who hate each other and don't agree about anything, they are still able to use the same money. This is maybe the most fundamental basis for the unification of humankind. Take, for example, say, Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden didn't like the United States very much. He hated American culture, he hated American religion, he hated American politics, but there was one thing American which he liked very much. And this American thing, which he liked very much, again, I'll take it out of my pocket, it's the American dollar. Osama bin Laden, if you wanted to give him some dollars in donation, he would accept them. He had bank accounts in dollars. So the question which we'll try to answer in the next segment is how exactly money succeeded in doing what no god and no king managed to do, to really unite the whole of humankind.